Welcome to Growing Pains, a podcast of the Sumner County Republican Freedom Caucus. I'm your host, Deanne DeWitt, and today we're talking business investments, budgets, and leadership with Chris Taylor, CEO of Forward Sumner Economic Partnership. Very grateful you're here with us today, Chris.
Morning, Deanne. I think it's a fantastic idea, and I'm excited about what we get to talk about.
Well, great. We've known each other for a lot of years when our kids were little at CIL Church, and we got to serve a term together on the county commission. I've always been impressed by your calm and discerning approach. And so I know I get to see a special side of you, maybe.
Yeah, sometimes.
Well, to that end, you have had a long career in law enforcement. You were with Metro Nashville few decades.
30 years, yeah.
30 years. Master's in finance, which is kind of an odd combination, but serving as chair of the budget committee for the county commission for a lot of years also. It really all came together, for me at least, personally witnessing you. So I'm looking forward to talking, though, a lot about what you're doing with Forward Sumner. So backtracking, though, let's start talking about math and numbers, everybody's favorite topic. So when you were in the weeds with county budgets, talk about what is really often misunderstood about how they work and why they're so important for the planning for our future.
When you start looking at any government budget, especially at a local level, the vast majority, 85 to 90% of it is payroll. So there's not a lot of discretionary funds, and that's kind of the misperception is that there's the opportunity for waste or corruption or whatever it might be. To be quite frank, it's really not there. And for no other reason, the fact that there's just not that much money. And on a local level, what I really enjoy about it is you can see the minutia. So you know exactly where the funding's going. You know where the $500 is, where $1,000 is. It's pretty easy to track and see. And when we start talking the county budget, it's even more so because what happens is, the vast majority of it's your schools and your school systems. And then you start looking at your elected officials like the sheriff's department, roads, and different things like that. And once you start getting those budgets involved, and when I say budget again, 95% of it's going to be payroll. Even for roads, the vast majority of what they'll spend other than hot mix and things like that, and again, very easy to track and see where that is going to be payroll. So the idea that there's a lot of discretion, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. The only way you're going to trim from most county budgets is by letting people go and firing them.
Well, that's just not the Sumner County way, is it?
No, it's not how most cities operate unless it's really deplorable times.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you know a lot about budgets, and I know this past year our county commission was able to shave a penny off the tax rate. Extremely
disingenuous. And the reason I say that, what they did was when we had set up the budget, prior to us, there hadn't been a thought to how to build, a safety net, so to speak, or, a savings account, whatever you want to call it. But that hadn't been necessarily done. So what we did was when we restructured the way the money was allocated, one of those things was we ensured that money went to debt services and then also went to the county general fund for reserves. And so they were set up so that each year you would slowly build your reserves. And that way, if you had, during COVID or different times, the ability to weather those storms without having to let resources go, without having to fire people, without a reduction in services, because usually those are the times it's most important. So one of those things we set up was an automatic, so to speak, set that would pay off our debt services with the idea that at some point the county would be debt-free, taking in mind that you're always going to have to build schools, you're going to have to work on roofs and do things like that. But with the idea that the only time you would really have to focus on large-scale projects was for huge, big endeavors like, say, the courthouse or things like that. And so when we did that, we allocated a certain amount of money every year that would go towards debt services, and it was actually paying our bonds down. It was fantastic. Because of that, we had the highest bond rating we could have for the county, which was the AA. Only thing stopping us from AAA was the fact that our county wasn't big enough. So it was just completely size-based. Well, what this current commission did was they took a penny off of debt services, a penny being the common denominator for how you measure budgets. It's how everybody looks at it. It's about $1 million right now. Well, when they took that penny away, what they did was they didn't necessarily reallocate or do anything. They just took a penny away. Well, yes, they did reduce the tax base, but they did it by taking away from our debt services. They didn't do it by cutting services. They didn't do it by finding savings other places or
waste.
Or creating new revenue sources or anything like that.
Right.
That would have been the traditional way of, hey, we can lower the tax rate because we have offsetting revenue somewhere else. They didn't do that. What they just said was, we're going to pay less money on our debt.
Which sounds good.
Well, to me, it's
Not to pay less money on debt, sorry, but it sounds good.
Yeah, it was just horribly irresponsible because we had bonds that were set to roll off at certain times with the idea that it was paced in a way that as your county grew, you need to maybe issue a bond for roads or whatever things. It would be easily done, and it really wouldn't impact the current budget ever because you would have a set amount already going towards your bond payments. And as they paid off, if you had to renew them, hey, it's easy. That money's already there. It's set aside. It's kind of predisposed for that. Well, what they've done is they've kind of thrown that mechanism off. So now by reducing $1 million payment a year, they've incurred that much extra debt. Interest is going to continue to compound. And so what they've done is very disingenuous. They said, hey, we lowered your tax rate. Well, really, they didn't lower your tax rate. What they did was they quit paying off on your debt.
Right. But it's a good thing to say, isn't it?
I'm sure it was done for the benefit of a mailer. There's no doubt in my mind I'll see a mailer that says it lowered my tax rate, and I know all they did was they quit paying my debt off.
Well, maybe we'll have to talk again next year when people are actually sending mailers and talking about elected seats. All right, let's shift gears. Let's talk about Forward Sumner. So with your current role, you are interacting with business leaders all day, every day. So tell me, what are you hearing from them? What excites them or what frustrates them about working here?
What's exciting about Sumner County is obviously we have the benefit of the Nashville bump in the sense that you've got all that Nashville traffic. You've got a lot of revenue and economic development that comes through Nashville, but we don't necessarily have a lot of the Nashville issues yet because we're still Sumner County. So it's not like Atlanta where they benefit from Atlanta, but they also have Atlanta traffic and everything else. So we still have that going for us. The issue is that at times, because of different fractions, and when I say that there's a movement towards, no growth, and recognizing that any municipality, city, or whatever, you're either going forward or backward. There's no neutral as much as people would like to think that. So there's been a movement to kind of stifle growth in different ways. Like there's a real push to, we don't want to have high density apartments or different things like that. Not recognizing the fact that it all plays together. You're not going to get commercial restaurants unless you have the rooftops to support it. Well, you don't have the rooftops if you don't also have apartment complexes. And ironically, that sentiment has kind of pushed down to a lot of your local boards that handle planning, zoning, things like that. So now there's obstacles towards development. So you'll have a developer come in and say, hey, I want to build a really nice facility. Well, the problem is there may not be housing that can support the workforce to support that facility. So it's all going back to where it's all interconnected. So they have to work through that. And it's just recently Gap, within the past 2 years was trying to create some apartment complexes that would be for their employees driven because they have so many that have to come from out of county.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that because those came out of the ground fast, like any well-planned project does, but they are right there next to the Gap distribution facility. They've made a major additional investment in their operations here.
But Gap has, but what was sad was that they had a plan for creating the attainable housing for their workforce, but it was met with, resistance, and they ended up just not doing it. They didn't follow through on that plan. They sold part of that property, and ironically, it's still going to be apartments because that's what it was zoned initially. But yeah, the Gap has made a huge investment, and what's neat about Gap, and that's they're one of the most progressive parts of that company, in that they're the most automated one in the entire United States. And they usually get as they test new automations out for whatever it might be, any part of the lines, assembly, loading trucks or whatever, it comes to our Gap campus in Gallatin. And it's pretty exciting when you go through there and you'll see, because they have automation down to a science. And then the neat part is, working with them to create apprenticeships that, we can hopefully grab our kids out of school based on their CTE, hey, did they have electronics, did they have mechatronics, whatever it might be, and then apply that so that as seniors, they can do a senior project at Gap, and then in turn, hopefully, line that up for a career with Gap. So it's just, I love the idea of being able to work with our schools and our businesses to create a pathway for a workforce. So.
Yeah. Well, and I'd say there's certain things that we are pretty cutting edge about in our career and technical education, getting opportunities for high school and following that path through, whether it's community college, technical college, or those kinds of apprenticeships. We have great partners.
Yep. Our schools have 37 different CTE clusters, pathways, and that's more than anybody else in the state. But kind of going back to what we were saying, the deterrent, though, is that attitude of no growth. And I'll give a perfect example. Hendersonville recently passed a little moratorium on growth for 9 months. It really doesn't impact anything to the degree that there's only about 8% of Hendersonville that's still unbuilt and so open to that. But what it does do is it sends a strong message to other business. So if you're trying to recruit, say, a commercial headquarters or anything along those lines, what they're saying is, hey, we don't want anything. And so that makes it harder when you're going to try and recruit an industry or anybody else to come, which is what cities need. You constantly have to renew revenue sources. So for a city, as they grow and expand, which all of them do, and it's not just the growth of population, it's inflation. So the salaries we pay today are not going to be the same salaries 6 years from now. So if you don't have new revenue sources over that 6 years to do that, the only one you've got is to go back to taxes, which is not the best way.
I mean, are you saying that local government cannot control inflation at the macro level?
As much as we'd like to think, yes. And that's where it's all the interconnectedness of the economy and recruiting and everything else. It's so painful when we do things like, hey, we don't want any growth. Okay, that's fine, but you need to define that better as to what you want, because what happens is that sends a general message. I'll give you a perfect example. Our current commission has turned down over $1 million worth of grants. Well, those were grants acquired for us by our state legislators. But more importantly, what happens is the state agencies that awarded those grants after spending the man hours to grade the grants, sign them, award them, and then in turn, when they're turned down by our commission, what happens is all those work hours were obviously wasted. So it's needless employee time that's been wasted by the state employees. But more importantly, that money's still allocated somewhere. And what happens is you'll look at the end of the year and the state's saying, okay, we're obligated to give this money to counties that are wanting to use it because Sumner County turned it down. Now it makes it harder for us to get future grants. But more importantly, it, for lack of a better word, boogers up the state's accounting system so that they have to try and find a way. And in fact, what happened was the commission had turned down a 3-star grant previously that was for $50,000. And the state did something they've never done before. They allowed Forward Sumner to be the direct grant recipient as a nonprofit, which they hadn't had to do before because you always had counties that would do it. And so it was just one where the state evolved to kind of address it. But it's not a good look for our county, because what happens is, from a state perspective, the legislators in Sumner County are doing things of a nature that's causing them to have to rework what they do. And so that's never a good way to work with our state partners. Yeah.
Well, and for hardworking servant leaders like yourself, and I can certainly attest personally, and I'll vent here for a minute, whenever I waste my time on something that is a great project, a great solution, and for whatever reason it just gets thrown away, that's just hard to accept. Time is valuable, and there's a lot of other things I could be doing with it. So I'm glad you shed light on that, because I hadn't taken it that step further. I knew a little bit about that 3-star grant, and I knew that they reallocated it through Forward Sumner, creating new pathways that didn't exist in the past because they had to work around things. But I didn't think about how that wastes their time. And so that's a great segue, because when you kind of marry your experience with the commission with what you're seeing through Forward Sumner, the overall tone and actions of our county commission, I know they've sent up some warning flags, and what are you hearing beyond what you've just said? Maybe that how does the outside look at Sumner County from the region?
Well, there's a twofold loss when you do things like that from the county commission's perspective. One, first and foremost, is we talk about man hours, but that has a price to it. And so what happens is when you start using your resources, be it county offices or state offices, to do something that, there's no other way to say it, they just completely abandon the process by turning it down, because it should have never been applied for, because then it would have saved everybody's time. But what happens is you have those hidden costs. Like, I'll give you an example. Let's say you've got your staffing for the sheriff's department, and they're looking to hire. Well, what happens is if we have a quick turnover for whatever reason, because say the county commission didn't give them a raise, or the county commission took away some benefits, whatever it might have been, you lose jailers. Well, there's the hidden cost of you lost that internal knowledge and expertise. But more importantly, when you have to retrain somebody, let's say it's 6 weeks to train. Okay, we know what the cost is. We can say, here's the payroll cost for 6 weeks of training associated with it. Here's the payroll cost for the instructors, and we can put that together. But what happens is during that 6 weeks, you're also paying overtime for the missing person that's no longer there. And so there's a lot of costs that come about from poor decision making by leadership. Yeah. And so it's not just something as simple as, hey, we missed out on a grant of $1 million. No, it in turn created issues for the state government that that has a cost associated with it too. So,
And does that perception impact
Yes.
investment?
and that's exactly what happens is now there's a leeriness necessarily towards Sumner County grants. There's a leeriness to work, and it carries over to other things too, where we've got existing projects. Like, let's say we've got a TDOT project. Well, if the expectation is that the county commission is going to go out of their way to try and create issues for that TDOT project, TDOT's not initially inclined to work with us then. And so it impacts everybody in that regard. So where they feel like they're stopping growth, what they're really doing is they're putting us in a negative. It's not stopping any forward movement. More importantly, it's setting us back, because now all of a sudden we've got to overcome those obstacles that they've created.
Yeah. Well, I think you've touched on something that I think is a really important point of education, that Forward Sumner as an entity has existed for many years. And one of the strong aspects of that organization is bringing the municipalities together, presenting a unified view of the priorities of Sumner County. And that's resulted in profound and, record levels of investment, especially from TDOT. I think folks might not realize that getting the improvements on 65 and 109 and what's coming to 386, that's because there's been a lot of hard work, and that groundwork has been laid through the partnerships that Forward Sumner brought to the table.
It's funny. A mentor of mine told me one time, he said, all you have to do is get the right people in the room and get out of their way. And that's really what it is our municipalities do an amazing job of figuring things out, and we have great municipal leadership. And our county leadership, not counting part of the commission, is fantastic. So there's people that are willing to sit down and figure out things. And when they do, what's great about it is Sumner County has always had a reputation for having everybody on the same page. You've got, 7 municipalities, you've got the county government. And so when that comes forward, it's a lot easier for TDOT to do a project when they said, okay, everybody's in unison on what this is. Here's what our priorities are. Here's what they need to be done. And so they don't have to fight those fights, because that's the less obstacles, the easier it is to get things accomplished. And TDOT's it's changing a little bit now. Now you actually have to have a little bit more skin in the game. So the last, for the 386-109 project, the reason it got started was the county put $10 million into it. And that was ARPA money we had at the time. But we're seeing that with Franklin. They're having to put up a lot of money. And there's TDOT projects that are being requested by municipalities and by counties where they're willing to pay 20%, and TDOT's saying that's not enough. So it's one we're very, very blessed to have the projects in the pipeline we do right now, because the way that's coming about is a lot more expensive for counties and municipalities than it's ever been.
It's probably for another segment, but I'm glad you just mentioned that. I was talking to an individual that is planning to run for county mayor in Williamson County, and he was talking a little bit about what you're just illuminating there with TDOT's investment and how they keep backing off on the percentage they intend to, or the percentage they expect of Williamson County. And that's not entirely fair either, but it is an interesting. I think the takeaway is that Williamson County and leadership there is looking at Sumner County and some of the leadership and the things that we're doing here. And I guess I'll just brag a little bit on the Sumner County Republican Freedom Caucus. The fact that we exist and we're thinking strategically and thinking forward about how we keep our county moving in the right direction. It's creating those opportunities for better collaboration across the region. And so I'm kind of excited as we think about that in terms of the future. So do you think we're at a crossroads? And if so, do you think that there's, some key things that we need to do?
Absolutely. And I think the Freedom Caucus is a perfect example of this. What happens is elected officials, through no fault of the owners, it's a 4-year term for most of them. So what happens is when you set goals in that time, it's always going to be short term. Everybody can say, hey, we've got long-term goals, but long-term goals theoretically are 10, 20-year goals, which are hard to see and do on a 4-year term. So what happens is what they do set up is really quick. It's a quick turnaround so they can see the success, and maybe they run for a second term and they do the same thing. So you almost have to have outside entities that are kind of impartial in the sense that they're looking for the betterment of the county. And that's where I align the Freedom Caucuses. The Freedom Caucus isn't looking at just this election. They're saying the next election. They're saying, okay, how do we set things up so that for the next 20 years, we've got great leadership? And you have to be really smart about that, because it's not just the leadership, but it's the turns that they're going to take and what you're going to do. So it's important to say, okay, what are our values? And again, Freedom Caucus has done a fantastic job of kind of saying, hey, we believe in smart structured growth. We believe in fiscally conservative government. And along those same lines, that's what you have to take into your planning. And again, I'll give an example of like a land usage map for counties. They'll put that together, and it'll say for the next 30 years, here's what our land usage is. And invariably, every county that's done that has come back and changed them to some degree within 10 years because it's different. So it's hard for elected officials to say, I'm going to see a 30-year goal through, because they're not going to be around for it. So it's really important that you have entities outside of government that kind of say, hey, we're going to help you make sure you stay to this true to this plan. And we see some things that are long-term. One of the things Forward Sumner does is in that regard is we look and say, okay, what's industry that we need in 10 years from now? Because that's going to be hard for anybody in an elected position to go, yeah, I can make sense for 10 years. Luckily you have people like Rosemary Bates for Gallatin's ECD that have been around for a long time and can do that because she has the longevity to say, okay, I understand what it's going to take, 8, 10, 15 years from now. So let's put those things in place today. But again, that's someone outside of an elected position. So.
Right. Really important points to consider. So, all right, well, before we wrap, let's just kind of bring it back to you. Your career between law enforcement and being an elected official and the work you're doing now with economic and workforce development. You have been a leader in so many capacities, including, I know you're now at Northfield Church, and you and Lori have raised 3 beautiful kids, adopted one, and your servanthood shows up in so many ways.
That's sweet of you to say.
Well, it's true. It's true, even if you get excited occasionally. But just tell me, what guiding principles really keep you steady?
I think it's the same as anybody, same as you and Alan, all of us. It's, having your faith. You have to be centered in your faith first and foremost. And then if you're walking your walk that you're supposed to, doing what you're supposed to, God makes it really clear. And I always laugh because God doesn't promise success. He just promises that he'll be with us through all these things. So I try and remind some people that when we start something, just because, yes, you prayed about it, we felt about like it's the right way to do, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be successful. It means that's what he wants you to do right then and there. And I think that's an important part, is always being willing to step forward in faith and not be afraid to fail. It's the idea that people fail is very common. And for whatever reason, sometimes Christians have a hard time with that, thinking that I should never fail because I've got God with me. Well, no. You look through the Bible and there's tons of examples of that, but that's one. It's just walking with your faith every day.
Yeah. Well, we learn something every step of the way, whether the path leads to success or failure. I kind of got chill bumps because I know that there's a lot of things that we can relate to on that topic. But well, and on that note, let's wrap it for today. Chris Taylor, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your time and for all you do for Sumner County.
And we appreciate what the Freedom Caucus.